Hi, Jeff Bridgman here of Jeff R. Bridgman American Antiques in York County, Pennsylvania. I brought to you today a 13-star flag, one of the most interesting that I've ever owned. This flag has all sorts of interesting features, one of which is really important. And this was part of my exhibition a couple of years ago at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, called A New Constellation. That featured 40 different 13-star flags in 32 different star configurations, spanning a period of about 100 years, a little more. So this particular flag, which is tiny in scale, dates somewhere between the 1830s and 1850. It was found in upstate New York, in the rural region west of Syracuse, up by Lake Ontario. So if you look here in the canton, 13 stars are arranged in what sort of pattern? Well, it's kind of hard to say, right? There's 4 up top, kind of, and there's 3 down at the bottom, sort of. It kind of turns up, and then there are 6 here and sort of an ellipse in the middle, or you could say it's a 4, 2, 2, 2, 3. But whatever the meaning, it is basically categorized as a random pattern. And if you look here, you can see that the proportions are not what they usually are. They're sort of squarish. So let me back up a little bit and explain some things about the American flag so that you can see what's going on. So the 13-star American flag was adopted on June 14th, 1777, Flag Day, and the legislation was very brief. It basically said 13 stars in a new constellation and 13 stripes alternating red and white. But it did not spell out what the constellation was supposed to look like, and it did not say anything about proportions, it being long and rectangular like we're used to seeing. It didn't say how the number of points that the stars had to have. It didn't specify the shades of red and blue. It didn't specify where the canton was supposed to be positioned or how big that was supposed to be. And really, it was one of the most simplest one sentence, really a long run-on sentence, of legislation ever enacted. Really, its use in the beginning was on ships. That was the purpose. So they just needed a tool to identify ships on the open seas as American. Now, one of the other things to note is that we have made 13-star flags not only from June 14th, 1777 through the period in which we had just 13 states, but long afterwards. We still make them today. Lots were made in the 19th century for various reasons. The U.S. Navy continued to fly them on small craft until at least 1916, sometimes after. They were authorized until 1916. And we made them for things like Lafayette's final visit to the United States in 1824 and 25, and also for other patriotic events. The Centennial Celebration in 1876, 100 years of American independence. And on the 4th of July, once we started to celebrate that in a more regular manner, we made flags for political campaigning with 13 stars, sort of a throwback to the Revolution and the struggles of liberty that were going on both then and during the Civil War, for example. And there were just all sorts of reasons. Now, on a small flag, it was much easier to fit 13 stars than it was to, say, fit 31 stars, which would be 1850 to 1858, or 26 stars, 1837 to 1844. So it was much easier to put this number on. Now, this is a homemade flag. Homemade flags were often one-sided. You're probably asking yourself, why is this thing facing this way with the stars over there? Well, that's because there was no particular way you had to do that in the 19th century. And we didn't get the flag ethics that we have today about flag display. Really, they'll start to appear in the late 1880s and magnify until the flag code is passed in 1923. So in the 19th century, it didn't matter. And if you think about somebody going into battle with a flag, carrying it, it didn't matter. I mean, if they were running that way, they'd have the flag here by a staff, right? It didn't matter. That really didn't come into the American consciousness until much later. So homemade flags like this one, especially those probably were made in haste or made without enough fabric at hand, were often one-sided like this one. So there is no canton on the other side. Very common homemade feature, and you know, it's about 50-50 whether you'll find the canton on this side, the reverse, as we think of it today, or the obverse. So something else that's interesting here, I think, is that, I mean, I love the flag displayed this way, but you can also flip it and display it in the proper vertical manner by today's standards. So if we just take and flip this around and see if I can get it to hang straight here. This is the proper vertical display. Today the canton should always be in the upper left. And I think this is kind of fun too, because it almost looks like this is the start of the flag, and you have vertical stripes in the canton in the upper left. Now, for the purposes of the video, I'm going to turn this back around. You can really display this either way. A flag collector, especially for a flag as great as this one, might display this either way, however they felt about it and however it looked in their collection. So another rare feature is that the canton, or the blue area, rests on a red stripe. That isn't typical. If you look, pretty much every flag that you see from now on, whether it's old or new, antique or vintage or new, you will see that the canton almost always rests on a white stripe. When it rests on a red stripe, that's something that we call the blood stripe or the war stripe. That's a nickname given to it because the theory is that that was done sometimes when the nation was at war. In reality, we know that it occurred for other reasons because it appears in flags outside of wartime. Now, the Mexican War took place in the 1840s, 1846 to 48, treaty signed in 48. But, you know, is this a Mexican War flag with probably not. I mean, it certainly could be made in some sort of patriotism of the war, but probably not. So most likely this is an accident, if you will. But once again, an accident, I mean, there was no specified way to do it. There's nothing technically wrong with this because there was no specification of where the canton, how big it should be, or where it should rest. Another peculiar feature about this flag is that it has 12 stripes. So, look, it starts on a white, which is also really unusual, and ends on a red. Why? Well, sometimes there's a reason for that that has some sort of meaning to related to slavery and the number of slave states versus the number of free states at the particular time during the antebellum, for example, or during the Civil War. At the outbreak of the Civil War, 12 might be removing South Carolina from the original 13-star count. Here, this is an earlier example, and so I think the reason that it occurred here is the same reason that there's only a canton on this side. They didn't have enough fabric, and they did what they had to make it. So that would explain why the red stripes here are pieced. There's a seam here, 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 and those are original to the flag's construction. And that's typical. People didn't waste anything at that time in America. It's not like you could run down the street to Joann Fabric and find yourself, some more material. And especially if there's a politician coming to town maybe and is going to speak, and or there's an election, or there's some sort of patriotic event, maybe a reunion of Rev War soldiers. That's certainly a possibility, or War of 1812 soldiers, or Lafayette's visit to the United States. This could be 1820s, but probably, a little more conservatively, 1830s, 40s, late as 1850 or so. Another wonderful feature is one of the fabrics used in the construction. This blue in the canton is a glazed cotton, and it's a glazed cotton, what we call chintz, and it's beautiful to see. It's just got a nice hue to it. I'll bring you closer for a better look as we get to the end. But the best feature of all, past the fact that it's an all cotton flag, by the way, a twill here. There could be some wool content in this red, but it feels it's probably just cotton twill. Plain weave cotton in the stars and the stripes, all hand sewn. But the best feature of all is the stars themselves, which you've probably noticed by now have 8 points instead of the usual 5. This is sometimes encountered in various flags of the 18th and 19th century. We actually see it a lot in illustrations of early flags, especially in the 18th century and in the first half of the 19th century. But in actual surviving examples of 13-star flags, good luck. This was the only flag in my exhibit at the museum with stars with a number of points other than 5. So out of the 40 flags, which were tremendous, rare examples, this was the only flag that had that trait. And it was one over only a couple that had the war stripe trait, even among a really rare, the best group of 13-star flags that I could come up with. And I had some great ones to choose from. So that's what really made this special. Battle flags in the Rev War, infantry battle flags, in the Revolutionary War, well, we didn't really carry the stars and stripes then, which is a whole nother story, but in whatever format they were, battle flags were typically square. So if you're wondering, why is it square? Well, because when you carried a flag on a staff, and in order to be as big as possible but not drag on the ground, square format was best. So if you could theoretically probably carry a 10 by 10 footer if you held it up high, because the amount of length on the diagonal would allow you to get it up high enough on a staff to carry it. So in the Rev War, they're smaller, generally speaking, usually 4 feet by 4 feet or 5 feet by 5 feet. During the Civil War, 6 by 6.5 feet was regulation, way bigger than this flag, about 4 times the size of the frame. 4 of these frames put together would give you a Civil War battle flag carried by infantry. And so this being so tiny for a sewn flag, which are typically 8 feet long or larger in the 19th century. Battle flags were actually small in a way. They were really tall, so they appear bigger, but in length, a 6.5 footer was a small flag. It's not today, but it was then. So for a collector, this is a really great trait as well. Because if you're going to own, whether you're going to own 10 flags or 50, or like some of my customers, 300, you can't display them unless they're small in size. And you can have a couple usually in your house, or maybe you have 4 houses, you can spread them out. Maybe you have a big business. Maybe you have a corporation where you can put 50 flags or 100 flags even. I do have clients that do that. But, you know, if it's at home, you're sort of limited. You might be able to throw a couple of big ones in there, a couple of, 15, 10 to 13 footers, let's say. But, you know, the number of places you can put that in a typical home, even if it's a big one, are kind of limited, usually. If the home's that big, usually has big windows. So the size of the flag, the beautiful cotton, glazed cotton canton, the square format, resting on a war stripe, 12 stripes, starting on white, pre-Civil War, which, by the way, I mean, there was so little private use of the flag until the war. People didn't fly it outside on their porches. You wouldn't see it used very often unless it was in political campaigning or military use. And even in political campaigning, not much of that was really done. So you might make a flag to welcome someone in that circumstance. Andrew Jackson, served two terms during this period. Fremont, Polk, Zachary Taylor, William Henry Harrison, Tyler, and maybe Franklin Pierce. That's 1852. So this could be made for something like that, but basically speaking, flags were not this small. So for all sorts of reasons, this is just a stellar example. And I'll just bring in for a good close-up look and give you a couple still shots. And well, thanks for joining me today. I hope you liked it. Thanks for joining me.